spelled Kathryn, to do that job. Well, you know, when you land, you've been prime crew and you're the famous guys on orbit, and you land and you're instantly nobody. You're less than chopped liver, and you're at the back of a very long line of people hoping to get to go fly again. I was fortunate that that long wait only lasted till about the end of 1984 and maybe a week into 85. And then my boss called me in and said I was going to be assigned with another spacewalker to what was still then called the Space Telescope. It had not been named for Edwin Hubble yet. And this was kind of a long time ahead to be assigning anyone to a shuttle crew. It was just the two spacewalkers. Because Hubble had been promised to be repairable on orbit since it began its design back in the 60s. But here we are in 1980, early 85 with the launch in October of 86, and it turns out virtually none of the tools and support equipment needed to deliver on that had been prepared or built yet. And so Bruce McCandless and I were charged with getting in the middle of that really quickly and making sure we were at least ready to fix anything that might go wrong on the deployment mission, and with as much time as we might have, think ahead to all the other jobs that might have to be done on a servicing flight, and make sure that every tool actually worked. How many of you were around in 1984-85 for any of the shuttle missions then? You'd recall that we went up to try to repair Solar Max and then try to retrieve two stranded communication satellites. Those things were already in orbit when the problem arose, so you had to pull out the engineering drawings and figure out what kind of tools and gadgets you would need just based on what the engineering drawings showed. And in both of those cases, and actually the third flight later, one of the critical tools failed to work because something about the size of a button on your shirt was on the spacecraft but not on the drawing. That could never be allowed to happen with this spacecraft. So as long as we had the telescope on the ground, we were the last two astronauts that had the opportunity to take every tool out and prove by doing it that each tool fit where it needed to, and each tool worked appropriately on a telescope. This, about the same time I was getting that assignment, I was also working on a policy commission that President Reagan had set up to look 25 years into the future and outline what the civilian space program goals and objectives should be. And in the course of that work, I came across this picture. This was painted by an artist named Chesley Bonestell to illustrate Wernher von Braun's visions for a future in space. And I was really floored when I saw this picture because this was painted in the year I was born. And the article in Collier's magazine that it illustrates talks about this craft, a winged spacecraft that's tailor designed to fly back and forth to low Earth orbit, make it possible to live and work for extended periods of time, hundreds of miles above the Earth. A space station, of course, looks kind of more like an Arthur C. Clarke designed hub and spoke. And right here, this little guy in the middle is described in the article as a telescope. And it is outlined how astronauts, spacesuit astronauts, will repair and maintain that telescope. So 1951, let's remember, is 6 years before Sputnik. No one's put anything in space yet, much less complex things like this, much less begun to learn how to do spacewalks. And if you know your space history, you'll know that the first two spacewalkers, Alexei Leonov and Ed White, both almost didn't make it. Alexei actually came terribly close to perishing on his first spacewalk because of all the things we didn't know about spacesuits and getting in and out of spacecraft. So at age 33, I'm looking at this picture. I said, this is drawn when none of it exists and no human being has ever done anything that's shown here. It's testament to the vision and imagination and capability of engineers. But in a mere 30-year span of time, that exists, looks different. It's white, got a different wing shape, but it exists and I've flown on it. That's coming along, it's on the drawing boards. It was starting to look like the truss and girder station we have in orbit now. And this also ended up not looking quite the same, but there is a real telescope out in California. It's this one, and I'm now going to take it up to orbit. The little dots are, of course, people, just to give you a sense of the scale of Hubble. School bus size. Filled the shuttle's cargo bay from port to starboard with maybe about 5 inches to spare on each side, and filled it fore to aft with about 12 feet to spare. 50,000-ish pounds. And on the right is just an exploded view to suggest to you all the different prospects for repair and technology upgrade that been built in Hubble. The mirrors that make it all work are buried in the middle in here. And the scientific instruments are wrapped around the bottom in 2 layers. The refrigerator-sized ones going through these big closet doors. The pie-shaped ones going through a layer above them. And then wrapped around again outside are 2 layers, 2 stacks, essentially of kitchen cabinets with latches and handles, tailor designed for spacewalking astronauts. And the key things that were intended to be maintained in orbit were these, sorry about that. The key things that were intended at the start to be fixable on orbit were to remove and replace these refrigerators, remove and replace these baby grand piano-sized radio instruments, and the lowest reliability things, batteries and tape recorders. Something I learned in the research for the book that stunned me, the original idea for maintenance was only those things I just listed would be done in orbit. And Hubble would be brought back to Earth about every 5 years. And all the hard stuff, the sort of guts of electronics, would be done on the ground. You know, easy latex glove, bare hand kind of stuff. By the time we came along, 84, the world had seen enough of the shuttle to know it's not as cheap as we thought. It's not flying as often as we thought, and it's a pretty dirty spacecraft in terms of contaminants that come off of it when it's in orbit. And NASA finally realized if we ever bring this thing down, it's never going up again. It's going to end up in the Smithsonian. It'll be too expensive, it'll wait too long, we'll lose too much astronomy. So suddenly in 1985, all of this other stuff that was never designed with EVA servicing in mind has to be made as EVA friendly